Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Steve Jewell. I'm with CommunityGiving. I want to welcome you to our weekly series of Community Connections and listening to our community. And today we're going to be talking with St. Cloud and Alexandria, two individuals who will be with us. I'm going to give people a couple minutes to get into the room before we get started here. So just take a couple minutes and relax, and we'll be getting started here in just a second. Okay, well, I think we're getting ready to get started here. Again, I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Steve Jewell. I'm with CommunityGiving, and this has been our weekly webinar series called Listening, our Community Connections, Listening to Our Community and Building Bridges, with stories today from St. Cloud and Alexandria. CommunityGiving, we provide support and services to community foundations in Greater Minnesota, Brainerd, Willmar, St. Cloud, Alexandria, Carver County, and a few other places. And we're very honored to be with you. And during the COVID crisis, we started these online webinars on a variety of topics, but more recently, after the murder of George Floyd, our whole country basically took a pause. And for us at CommunityGiving, we had a number of discussions, and at the end we decided that the most important thing we could do to begin with is to listen. Several of us happen to be part of a majority white population, and this has been an issue that has deeply impacted communities of color. And first and foremost, we felt the most important thing we could do would be to listen. And so this actually is the third of our series of simply listening to voices and trying to assess and learn what we can do, both as an organization, but then also what we can do with our communities. And we hope it leads to us having greater community conversations about this really very important topic. And we thank you for being with us today to be a part of that. I'd like to get started by introducing our Executive Director of the Alexandria Area Community Foundation, Holly Witt, and she is going to introduce our first speaker today. Holly?
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. We're happy that you're joining us today. And again, we want to thank Reverend Alberts and Kevin Taylor for joining us today. And really, we've been listening and we've been learning a lot. So we're anticipating to hear some stories today, too, to help us on our journey of learning. So it's my honor to introduce to you Kevin Taylor. And Kevin is the youth pastor at Reach Church and also the Youth for Christ director in Alexandria. I met Kevin about a year ago in a coffee shop, and then we actually had a conversation about 2 months ago, and so we've been in touch, and it's just been just a joy to get to know him a little bit better. And so I'm excited to introduce Kevin to you, and you can hear his story of living in Alexandria for the last, 15 years or so?
Yeah,
Kevin. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Kevin, and thank you so much. And everyone meet Kevin.
All right, well, thanks for having me. And I'm just going to apologize ahead of time. If there are any glitches, I am at a camp that is in the middle of nowhere. I'm in a little town called Bryceland, Minnesota. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that place, but it is literally in the middle of cornfields and soybean fields. And that's kind of my view. That's what I see. This morning we had the sprayers flying overhead. We had the fields getting sprayed. So that was interesting and also terrifying because we thought we were under attack. But that's neither here nor there. As Holly said, I've been in the community for about 15 years. Started with a job at a company called Marco. I was in the military prior to that, and I moved my family here because I wanted to build a better life for my kids. I've got 2 kids. I've got a wonderful wife named Nikki, a 17-year-old daughter, Alexia, and a 15-year-old son, Lucas. And so, you know, we moved here. I moved my family, I should say, back in 2005, and You know, the whole reason was that we wanted to put our kids in a community and in a space that wasn't big city. I was born in Dallas, Texas. Grew up in big cities my whole life. Born in Dallas, lived in cities like San Antonio, San Diego. And then when I was in the military, we were out in the Washington, D.C. area. So I've always been around big cities, lots of traffic. I'm not a fan of traffic. So anytime that the population of Alexandria increases due to summer rentals and vacations, I almost have a little bit of PTSD when it comes to traffic. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that's okay. And so I moved my family there because when my daughter was born, there was a shooting underneath her bedroom window, and it was a group of guys had a party at in their apartment, and this was a decent place to live. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't run down or anything like that. It was a nice apartment complex, but a fight broke out. Things happened. Gunfire rang out just below my daughter's window, and so you know, we immediately began, as I was starting the process out of the military, to look for a place to live, and Alexandria felt like that place. Now, my first interaction with Alexandria was actually back in 2000. It was in the winter of 2000. I flew in to meet my future in-laws, and you know, I got off a plane in Minneapolis, took the Executive Express. The driver was decent. He kind of gave me the riot act about, you know, being the reason that he had to drive to Alexandria in the middle of the night, in the middle of a snowstorm. It was like one of the worst snowstorms, at least is what he told me. One of the worst snowstorms in the state in quite a while. And my plane was the only one to land. And now we had to drive the however many hours it took us. I think it took us like 3 or 4 hours to get from Minneapolis to Alexandria that night. And we arrived in Alexandria. This was back when our bowling alley was on Hawthorne. I'm not kidding you when I tell you that I walked into the bowling alley, walked up the stairs, and like bowling balls went down the lane, and then it was silence. Like you could hear every pin drop, and then nothing after that. And I'm not kidding when I tell you, it felt like everyone turned their attention to me, being a Black man in the middle of the night in Alexandria in the year 2000. Now that's not that, I mean, it's 20 years ago, right? But contextually, it's not that long ago. And so as I asked the clerk at the desk, like, hey man, I just need I need a telephone so that I could call for my ride. Where can I find a phone? He pointed me back outside to a payphone, to which I quickly made my way outside, called my then girlfriend, and asked her to come and pick me up. When she came to pick me up, I waited outside, and you know, while it's snowing, I waited outside. Didn't really feel that comfortable or safe. So as a soldier, I had my bags right next to me, my back to the wall, and I'm basically looking around to see if anyone is coming outside, who's coming outside, and what's around me, you know. And she was there within minutes. I got in the car. We went to her parents' place, and the next morning, I wake up to meet my future in-laws, and my father-in-law, who's from Boston, it off because, you know, I'm trying to make a good impression. I want to marry their daughter. And so as we began to build our relationship, you know, they took me out. My father-in-law took me to go grocery shopping, and part of that grocery shopping included being met with some very interesting stares, being approached in a manner that was a little less than desirable. But for me, I'm the kind of person that if you don't like me, well, I mean, it sucks to be you. I don't care. I guess is how I'll say it. If you don't want to get to know me or take the time and have the opportunity to be a part of my world, then that's really not my problem. That might sound a little bit callous, but I try to present myself in a manner that I want to show love to everyone. I want you to know that as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome here. You're welcome into my space. You're welcome into my world, and I want to know you. I want to be a part of your life. I want to help and encourage you in any way that I can. And so I've always been the type that I don't force my friendship on anyone. I don't force anyone to be in or have relationships with me. but I do invite you into that space. And it's a space that I take very delicate care of, because it's important. And so fast forward a few years, my family and I moved in 2006. We moved here. I believe that I had a lot of advantages because my wife's mother was the Chamber of Commerce director, and I was a military veteran. So I had a lot of things that were voting in my favor. There weren't a lot of jobs that were available to me, so I had to work an hour outside of my home. I drove to St. Cloud from Alexandria every day so that I could have a job that would provide for my family and I in the IT industry. And that was a great experience for me. I loved what I did. I enjoyed the work that I did. I liked doing technical things. So for me, that was a win. I think it really wasn't until I decided to leave that job and move into more of a ministry role that I started to see things maybe weren't as rose-colored as I had imagined. I started to see that there were some things that were happening within our community. As I'm reading in the paper, we had some crimes that had happened, some thefts, a great deal of thefts that started to happen. And one of the things that I noticed was as these crimes were being committed, the Echo Press, our local newspaper, would cover it. And there was one comment in their online presence that really kind of struck a nerve with me. And it was, if there wasn't so much diversity in our community, none of these crimes would have been committed. And I looked at my wife, and I suppose I should back up a little bit. I'm in an interracial marriage. So picture this: my wife, who is Caucasian, my kids, who are biracial. We hear about this, and my wife and I are looking at our kids, and they're young at the time that this happened. And this comment comes out of, if there wasn't diversity here, these crimes wouldn't happen. And so I was furious, because I knew, as a Black man, I knew that there weren't a lot of Black people, period, in my community. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, hold on, there's only a handful of us. Are they going to start rounding us up? Is this going to be a situation where I fit the description, and I have to fend for myself, or prove, like, the burden of proving my innocence is on me rather than the burden of proving my guilt being on law enforcement and those who are in that position. And so I spoke with my wife, and she was heartbroken by it, because I'd been invited to be a part of a diversity organization, including more diversity in the community. That seemed to go away as quickly as I found out about it. And so we later come to find out that those crimes weren't even being committed by anyone. Not one person that was a part of that was a person of color. They were local people who had grown up in the town for quite some time, is my understanding, and they were all Caucasian. And so when I learned that, I never saw a retraction of the comment. I never saw a call for an apology to the minority community. I never saw anything that came of it, and maybe I just missed it. But to me, I was expecting more from my city. I was expecting more from, especially from the local paper, that allowed this comment to stand without retracting. And freedom of speech is freedom of speech, right? It is what it is. But it's something that needed to be talked about. And so I decided, well, I think it's time for me to get involved and see what's actually happening in my community. I need to be more vocal and get into spaces where I can make a difference. And so I started actively looking for ways to mentor students. And very quickly, hey, we've got these Black kids, would you mentor them? And I'm like, well, why do I need to mentor them? They just need a father, like, especially for Black males, they need a father figure. They need a man that will stand by their side. Yes, I can teach them things that are going to be different than what a Caucasian man can do, but they literally need consistency. That's the thing that they need. They don't need just consistency from a Black person, but they need consistency as a whole. And I understand placing people together that look like you. Like it makes a difference for students of color, especially when they go into their school, which I work for our school district now, but when they go in and they see someone that looks like them, it gives them a little bit more of a sense of peace. Um, but we all want to be treated we all want to be treated equally. We want to be treated like we matter and like our opinions matter. And so that incident happened. And then there was an incident where my son and I were, I was literally in a store, a big box store in our town. And I was sitting in an area where I was writing a sermon. I was writing a sermon to preach to teenagers. And I had my backpack with me, and my son was sitting having a treat, and we got up to go find my wife, and we're walking around this store, and I noticed that there was a guy that was following us. Now, I've been in this store a million times. I've purchased things there. My wife loves this particular store, and she's given them more of my money than I really care to admit, and that she loves the store. And so we get back to where my wife and my daughter are, and we hear, yeah, I'm in the back of the store following two black males. One has a backpack. And my wife hears this, and my daughter hears this, and my son hears this, and they all turn and look at me and ask, are they talking about you guys? Are they talking about you and Luke, my son? And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that he is. This is the same store that had also just maybe weeks prior donated money to the nonprofit that I run. And so I'm looking at all of these situations and I'm going, okay, there's a bigger issue here that has to be like we can't exist in this community and have it go on like this forever. And so I got involved with our school. I was hired a couple of years ago to be the equity and inclusion liaison for our district, for District 206. And I'm learning about all these students who are called slanderous names, who are referred to as monkeys, as the N-word, so many different things, and finding that our school doesn't always know how to handle it. And so they started to ask a lot of good questions, but the damage it's been done. And so I'm so thankful for organizations like this that will help to raise awareness. And what we've done in our community is we started a weekly Zoom call, actually every Thursday. At about 3 o'clock, we sit and we talk about these things. We talk about what it means to be an ally. We talk about what diversity looks like, in our minds, and how does it work for each and every one of us to feel like our voices are heard, like we're seen, and like we actually matter. And so, I'm thankful for you guys and all that's being done as far as taking the opportunity to learn. I think that there's a lot of work to do yet. And I think it's good work, and it's very possible to achieve a lot of goals. I don't know that we can fully eradicate racism as a whole, but I believe that if we could change it, if we could change a percentage of the population and really just change the way that people look at and value people. I mean, I think it greatly comes down to whether or not we value people on a level that actually matters. I think that's when things will start to change. So with that, I mean, that's kind of my story. I don't really know where else to go with it, other than, I'm excited for the work that we're doing in Alexandria. There are a lot of times, I'll say this, and then I'll give up the floor, I suppose. There are a lot of times that my wife and I really question whether or not we're doing the right thing for our kids by living in a community that doesn't welcome and that doesn't have a lot of diversity. When our kids leave the house, and I think about this even for Caucasian kids, when they leave home, especially those that go into the military, they're immediately thrust into a diverse situation. And now if you're going into the military, you're not only thrown into a diverse situation, but you're thrown into a diverse situation where people have a really strong need to depend on you, to be able to depend on you. It literally becomes a matter of life and death. And so a lot of those young people get out into the world and realize that, hey, I can count on people that don't look like me. What have I been taught? And so I just welcome the opportunity and and really the challenge to speak life into this thing. So that's all I got.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I know we're going to have more questions for you later. And I just want to say that when I think about myself as a white person and just trying to wrap my head around experiencing the things that you do, I mean, that's really the whole point of these workshops, is that we need to remember what it's like to walk in other people's shoes so that we can truly relate. So I'm excited to be able to introduce to you Reverend James Alberts now. He is a pastor at Higher Grounds Church of God in Christ in St. Cloud. He's been involved in a number of community projects too. And he also took part in the community policing agreement. And I know he'll share a little bit about that as well. So Reverend James, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. And thank you everyone for tuning in and allowing us to be able to share our stories with you and our lessons. I also want to thank Kevin too for sharing. And I just want to tell you, I hear you, bro. No, your labor is not in vain. No, you are not doing the wrong thing by being a part of the city. You are the tip of the spear. And you are paving a way that allows for that diversity, for that young Caucasian child to have an experience and exposure to a life and a lifestyle that is actually more prominent than what their situation and circumstance will allow them to have. So do not grow weary in well-doing. That's the preacher part of me that will come out and tell you, and I feel you. I feel you. We have more in common than I originally imagined. I am from Austin, Texas. I hail from Austin, Texas. So go Longhorns. And my father was an Air Force air traffic controller. And so I'm a military brat. I'm not military myself, but I'm a military brat. And he was in the military for 26 years. I moved to Minnesota from San Antonio, Texas. I drove in a 1980 Buick Skylark in 1995 on January 4th from San Antonio to St. Cloud, Minnesota. It took me over 24 hours to get here. I had to drive a certain speed so the car didn't shake apart. And I was wearing shorts when I left San Antonio. And when I arrived in St. Cloud, I was wearing everything I owned, which wasn't much, in an old duffel bag that my dad gave me. So I get it, I understand it. But the experiences that I had growing up, moving around a lot, made me ready to deal with a new change of scenery and a new situation, because I was coming here to begin my family as well. I won't necessarily say that it prepared me for everything that I was coming into. I had moved here in 1995. So that's 25 years. I'm the pastor of Higher Ground Church of God in Christ in St. Cloud, Minnesota. I am on my 19th year as the pastor. I have been a part of many things in the city of St. Cloud and have claimed this city as my own. And I honor and appreciate being a part of a city. And I have a saying that St. Cloud is big enough to make a difference and small enough to make it happen. And so I believe in the work that we do. I believe in the presence that each of us have in order to bring about the kind of change that we want to see. And I believe that the time is now for us to be able to realize that truth and to be able to realize the place that we hold in history to be able to make change possible and to be able to make change happen. I've got many situations and circumstances that I can point to, from being pulled over, felony stopped by the police by several gunpoint, and handcuffed and put into the back of a car for only to be released moments later because they did not have an appropriate description, is what they described, as a person that of color. I have experienced racism from the community. I've been called the N-word more times in the state of Minnesota than I ever was in the city of Texas or in the state of Texas. And so I remember walking across the causeway that goes over now University Avenue in St. Cloud State, from the engineering and computer science building over to Hollenbeck Hall. And just in that short walk, was called the N-word as somebody was driving by. They felt that it was necessary that they inform me of that particular status in that short walk just across the highway or just across the street. So there are a lot of stories like that. And given the moment that we exist in right now, one of the things that is shocking is how shocked everybody is about the moment that we are in. The existence of racism is pervasive. It's absolutely everywhere. But the reason why that it is absolutely so pervasive is because of the ignorance that we claim and we perpetrate in our everyday lives. And this is something that I believe that many, if not all people, have an opportunity to be able to admit to. I serve under the Bishop Fred W. Washington in the Minnesota Ecclesiastical Jurisdiction of the Church of God in Christ. My wife is Natoya Alberts. She and I have 10 children together, and we reside in the city of St. Joseph currently, which is another small town along the way. I make it my business to make myself known to any and all law enforcement, and am not ashamed of who I am and what I am. And I tell them all the time, I've been Black all my life, and I reckon I'm gonna die Black. And what that means is that every form of racism that you can imagine, I have seen, if not have experienced directly. And that's not bragging, that's just testifying, because I've made it through the test. In the midst of the George Floyd situation, I have been a part of the protests. I've been a part of the conversations, and even in the city of St. Cloud, when we had a situation of just a few weeks ago, just after George Floyd, we had our own riots here. We had our own situations here that I was called into action for, and just needed to be present, and in conjunction with, not in opposition to, but in conjunction with our local law enforcement. I have been able, or we were able to allow for a protest to proceed without it descending into utter chaos, and allow ourselves time and room to express ourselves in anger and in hurt. And where we are now and where we are experiencing things now, we find ourselves in a situation and in a circumstance where we have to deal with the truths that exist right now. And it's not pretty, but America is a place, it's a country, it's an existence for which freedom in its various forms, we can point to and say, it's not pretty. Nobody volunteered for the independence movement. from the monarchy of the British Empire. Nobody volunteered for the anarchy that came about during the Civil War. Nobody volunteered for the Civil Rights Movement and any movement worth its mettle, because no one will tell you that it was their choice to go through that chaos, but they had an obligation. And so this is where we find ourselves now. And what I would tell you and tell anyone, that at this particular moment in time, where we find ourselves is not what we choose to do, but what you have to do. And what do you have to do in order to claim to be a part of a great civilization? What do you have to do? I am obligated to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. I am obligated to participate in this world that doesn't like me, that doesn't right now work toward the ends that I would see for myself, doesn't have the systems in place that would necessarily say that it cares about Black or brown or people of color. But I have to participate. And so I don't get a feel good. I don't get to give up or quit because I don't feel like it, or that it doesn't look right, so therefore I'm not going to participate in it. I have to. And that is how change occurs. The Honorable John Lewis, who is laying in state right now at our nation's capital, would never have told you that he volunteered himself for the moment that he found himself in, staring down law enforcement, dogs, horses, batons, and whatever they would have in order to cross over the Edmund Pettus Bridge peacefully. He wouldn't have told you that he volunteered for that. He would have told you that he was obligated to participate in that movement and obligated to participate in that situation, in that circumstance. And are we in Alexandria or in St. Cloud sitting in a historical moment like that? And I would tell you that we do not know. And that history is the determiner of what the moment is that you have right now. And so what you want to be able to do is be able to answer that question for yourself. And what do you want history to be able to say about you? Here in St. Cloud, we have the St. Cloud Community Policing Agreement that was put together and assembled some 15 years ago. And that St. Cloud Community Policing Agreement is a piece of paper that basically says that the community and the police have an agreement with one another to be able to work through issues and challenges that we see beneficial to come through and to stand up for. And that if you stand up for this in the time and the crisis that appears, I will stand with you when we do it. That's what the agreement says in a nutshell. And what we want to be able to understand is that the agreement is a piece of paper, but that the relationships that were formed from the agreement, that the work that was done to put the agreement together, that in and of itself is the power behind the agreement. So that when we have something like a riot that happens, and there are angry protesters that are standing outside of the police department, that the police in and of itself has other tools in their toolbox, that they don't just have to react in a defensive way, bringing out military gear and SWAT teams and all of these different types of things, that there is a community engagement that already exists that we have a part of. And that was enacted in the last several weeks. And what happened is that the community was able to come together, have a small conversation about what we can do, and that for the communities that could respond, did respond. And because of the engagement that we had and the trust that existed between the community and between the police, we were able to exist together where we allowed the appropriate one to take the point on the conversation and the moment, so that when I show up at the place, at the hot spot where the riot is going on, And I request that we have an opportunity as a community to be able to engage, that the police officers and the law enforcement stay out of sight, that they are not present, but they respect that the community itself needs time to be able to churn on what they've seen. Because what's most important to understand about the moment that we live in is that the police officers are mourning too, that they saw what was going on, that they saw what happened, that they didn't agree with the way that it went down, that they were the ones that were saying that's not policing, that is murder, that is not law enforcement, that is taking the rights of a human being away. But also standing in stark contrast is their position on law enforcement, that even though there was a person who was wearing a badge that was doing something that was offensive to the badge, doesn't take away from the not the power, but that the badge itself stood for truth and stood for justice and stood for the right things at the right time. So there's a whole bunch there and a whole bunch of things that went into that. And we could talk for a long time on any one of those things, but I'm glad that I had opportunity to be able to share a little bit with you. And I know that there are many of you that have questions. And so at this time, I'm gonna give it over to Sarah Carlson, and she's going to help us negotiate the question and answer period.
Well, thank you both so very much for sharing your direct experiences. While they are heartbreaking to hear, they are essential for our communities to hear so that we can start to do the work of repairing that. So the first question that we wanted to pose to you both today was really picking up on this thread that James was just talking about interactions with law enforcement. And recently there's been a pretty significant movement around defunding the police. And that has connotations that are widely varied. So can each of you share what that means to you when you hear things like defund the police, and what is your stance on that? Let's start with Kevin.
Yeah, so so this is a funny question. We actually had this conversation in our weekly call a couple of weeks ago, and for me, defund the police, I strongly believe that is the absolute wrong terminology. Some of my best friends are law enforcement. Some of the, I was able to be a part of the Blandon leadership cohort for Alexandria, and I was recommended by the captain of police from my city because of the leadership that he saw in me and that he sees in me. And so for me, using the terminology of defund the police, I think that's the wrong. I think that's the wrong way to say it. I would love to see better training. I'd love to see mandatory counseling. I'd love to see time off. When there's an officer involved, an officer involved shooting, it isn't easy to take a life. And I think when you look at it, and so maybe my perspective is a little different. So from a military perspective, anytime that you look at what it takes to take the life of another person and just the mental strain that puts on you, the things that happened to George Floyd were absolutely wrong. I don't know what that officer's mental background was. There's a lot of speculation that went into that. But my guess is that he had been involved in other situations that he just never learned any better, and he never got the proper counseling that he needed. He probably didn't need to be wearing the badge in the first place if he had some mental health issues. So defunding the police isn't really the terminology that I believe that there needs to be retraining. I think that there needs to be a restructuring. And I love what Reverend James shared, more of a communication between the community and the police. Like that in itself is huge. That's huge. Because at the end of the day, if we're left without the police, we're left in a land of lawlessness. And where there's lawlessness, there's chaos. And that just can't be.
Thank you. Pastor James, what would you say about that in addition to what you shared? about the work in St. Cloud?
So I'm going to try and limit my response. We've got time to be able to work through this, but I have two schools of thought. And since we are here to be uncomfortable, let me answer uncomfortably first. And I'll tell you to burn the whole thing down. And that's not a question mark on the end of that. Now, here's the reason why I say this. When you hear the phrase defund the police, what I don't want anyone to think, or what I want to make sure that everybody understands, is exactly what Kevin was talking about. That's the wrong phrase. But listen to what he said, though. He did not disagree with the intent, because Kevin understands the intent behind the phrase. The intent behind the phrase is speaking to a poison that is in the system that we have not found a way to be able to root out any other way. And so when we say defund it, we are actually speaking toward an idea or notion that we've got to start over from a way, and not start over because we think that the police that we have are garbage and we just need to get rid of them. No, I too have many. I can't believe I'm actually saying this, because I know in several other conversations when people talk about you're racist. No, I have Black friends. Well, defund the police. Well, no, I have police friends. So I find that a little ironic and comical a little bit. But the truth is that we have found that there is a problem with the police structure, with the law enforcement structure. The truth is that the poison that we're talking about is in the entire judicial system. And we can look at the numbers that bear that out, the statistics that bear that out. And so that's one end of the argument when I say burn it down. I don't really want to get rid of the police. I don't really want to defund the police, but I would really like a solution to the problem that has been in existence for such a long time. And I see one of the people that with a comment that asked the question about why do Black men run away when they are in police custody. This is a part of the poison that is aware. We are aware of the poison. And I hear people say oftentimes, that, there are a few bad apples and all of that kind of stuff that are in there. Yeah, you're right about that. But I don't know if the dude pulling me over is a bad apple. I don't know if the police officer that is going to deal with me in my situation is starting to spoil. And is my life worth that? I know that I may not make it to a judge or make it to a jury, that I won't be in the state of Minnesota. It is unlikely, especially in greater Minnesota, it is unlikely that I will be tried by a jury of my peers, just because of the nature of this. So how about that? I'll leave it at, because in order for me to be tried by a jury of my peers, where are you going to find 6 Black people to sit on a jury? Nope, not going to happen. So the judicial system is stacked against me already. So I'll leave it at that, Sarah.
Thank you both. So another question in the chat came through about, as a white person in a small community that lacks diversity, do you have recommendations for our listeners on specific actions that they could take that would broaden their own education, and how to get involved to be part of the change that is needed and not to be part of perpetuating the problem?
Well, one thing that I'll say, and this is something that I've kind of noticed in this whole process, really with that question right there, is not being quick to get offended when someone recommends a resource. Like, to start there makes a world of difference, because what I've learned is, like, if I recommend a book like White Fragility, people are up in arms, or recommend watching a podcast or something along those lines. Like, don't be, again, Reverend James, you said it great. Like, it's time to get uncomfortable. Like, there are so many, I've been uncomfortable my whole life, but at the same time, I just kind of look at it and go, okay, sounds good. You have your opinion. I'm gonna move you to the side because I don't need to deal with you right now. And we can talk about whatever you want, but I just don't have time for it in this moment. So White Fragility is a great book. I highly recommend it. But I also highly recommend reading some Black authors, reading about historical events within the Black community, reading about some historical events within the Native American and within the Native American community. You know, there are a lot of things that we don't know, or that we don't know that we don't know. You know, and we had a discussion, you know, just about the complete history of America and the fact that Black people were here long before Christopher Columbus, and that's a little known fact that doesn't really come out, because you know, anytime that you talk about the birth of this country or the history and the making of this country, it's always that Christopher Columbus discovered it. There are so many other facts that I think people don't want to talk about, because then you have to go and unteach all the things that have been taught. And when you talk about undoing and pulling on the thread of history, you're talking about undoing years, decades. I mean, we're talking about undoing the entire thing, so that we have an accurate depiction of what this country was really founded on.
Thank you. James?
Ditto. I think that Kevin brought up some very significant. White Fragility is an excellent book. White Like Me is another one. The New Jim Crow is another book that that can be looked at. I challenge you in a small town to invite someone like me to a public lunch. Right? Let's go sit down at Your Caribou and have a coffee together in public. Let's go to, what is the name of that restaurant over in Freeport? I can't remember the name. Is it Charlie's?
Yep.
Let's go to Charlie's and have breakfast sometime, right? I drive right by it on the way to one of my favorite fishing spots. What I think that we have to do, here's what I will tell you. In the middle of a riot, I was down on 38th in Chicago, and someone had set off fireworks it was just days after George Floyd's death, and we were right there, and there was a crowd of people, and someone set off some fireworks that sounded like gunshots, and people scattered just everywhere. I didn't move, I didn't run, namely because I'm saved and I love the Lord, and if I'm gonna go see Jesus, hey, this is a great time to do that. But more importantly, running wasn't going to do any good at all. And so what I realized is that I am here in this moment and in this time to participate in whatever way that I need to be able to participate. What I recognized out of that moment, because when the dust settled and it was realized that it was just fireworks, the crowd came back, but they didn't know what to do. People were just there, and they were willing to risk life and limb, but they didn't know for what. And so they were present, but there was no leadership. They were present, but there was no direction. And so kind of the way that you feel right now about, I don't know what to do. What can I do? What can I do? Number one, be present. Number two, be courageous. The Bible says, only be thou strong and of good courage. And you stay there. You stay in the midst of being strong and being courageous, and you will identify, it will be identified for you what to do next. I didn't know what to do when I thought gunshots were going off, so I'm just going to hold my ground. And it turned into a moment where I could speak to the crowd, and I did, in order to present an opportunity for them to recognize their own power in this moment. If you're not sure about what to do, here's a great opportunity to call me. Here's a great opportunity to send me an email. I'll come have lunch with you. I will come and have a conversation with you. I have been uncomfortable all my life as well, just like Kevin said. And I'm used to it now. I'm used to the looks and the stares and the little old ladies that turn around in the middle of the grocery store aisle and walk the other way. I'm used to the old men that stare you down because they think that you're a threat. I'm used to the young mothers that refuse to answer the young kids' questions because they see somebody that they've never seen before look a certain kind of way that they've never recognized before, and the kid has genuine questions. So be present and be courageous.
Thank you both. That's wonderful, wise words. Okay, our final question for you both today is, what is giving you both hope for our communities and our nation right now?
Well, I guess I'll go first again. You know, for me, I'll use a very recent example. For me, you know, I'm here at a camp, and none of the kids that are with me look like me. It's a camp that you know, I threw the invitation out to a number of students, and they just weren't able to go for one reason or another. But all the students that are here, they don't look like me, and their parents trust me with their kids, and that means a lot. So they're also parents that are asking some really good questions that are we're in constant communication and dialogue. And you know, as we were here, there's a family that does the maintenance for this camp, and they've got two young boys. One, I think they're 5 and 2, and the 2-year-old, without hesitation, just walks up and grabs my hand and wants to go play at the playground, right? For me, that is a direct indication that that child, their parents aren't teaching them hate, right? Both of the boys walked up and wanted to, hey, come play a game with me. And mom is smiling, and actually she's our photographer. She's taking pictures of all this. And, you know, that the fact that there are still families in the midst of all of this, in the midst of everything that's going on, that are still teaching their kids, hey, you need to look and see people the way that Jesus saw them, right? You need to love people no matter what, without question, without hesitation. That's what's bringing me hope. The fact that there are people that are on calls like this willingly. I don't know of anyone that's, now you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of anyone that's being forced to be here. But there are a number of people that are here. That brings me hope. But I will tell you that on the flip side of that, I also have a little bit of intrepidation, because I feel like we've been here before. And I'm not as quick to just look at it and go, oh, yay, people want to be allies. Awesome. Look, I've read this book, and we're about at the part in the book where the page is about to turn and everybody's going to go back to what they were doing. It was probably a month ago, I was a part of a discussion, Time for Change. And I presented one challenge. I didn't have a whole lot to say other than, will you still be here in a week or 2 weeks? Will you be here in a month? Will you be here next year? Will you still be down for the cause when your friends turn on you, when your friends begin to call you names, when your friends begin to pull out of business deals? Will you be here when your friends begin to say, well, hey, I can't support you because you support that? That's where I'm at. That's the place that I'm at. I have hope, because there are little sparks, little glimmers. It looks different, but in a lot of ways, I'm just being honest, it still looks the same. And so that's kind of where I'm at.
Wow, that's a hard one to follow up to. The Willie Lynch letter, if you ever get a chance to read it, you're not ready. Because if you want to talk about systematic racism, if you want to talk about where this was created, if you are not really even created, but where it was put on paper, if you want to talk about where this is proven to be much bigger than Kevin and I, grab the Willie Lynch letter and read through that. Read the planning that was put in hating of people, at keeping them down, at squashing their hopes and their dreams, about separating their men and raping their women, about lynching them in public so that you send a message to them, about lopping off limbs and putting cattle prods to them so that they would know what place and what position they held in this society, that they should never be allowed to read. They should never be allowed to read, so that they could figure out that there was more of them than there was of us that wanted to keep them down, and that they could never communicate to one another in order to formulate a plan to get out of the monopoly that we want to hold over them. The hope that I have is that it didn't work. It didn't work forever. The hope that I have is that though you even put it down on paper, God had a bigger plan than that moment and that time, and that idea, mankind itself recognized that that was not the way we wanted to live. I can point to situations and circumstances, much like my brother Kevin here, who could say, for this reason, I have young white men that call me their father figure. I have young white females that have asked me to act as their dad as they introduce me to their boyfriend. As pastor, you get to see all of these different things. Racism is taught, and we have a responsibility and an opportunity to unteach it. And though it persists, as long as we're willing to stand up against it, and it comes back to that courage thing, there is an opportunity to overcome it. And we sit at a point in time right now, and this is where I hope that the turning of the page is different this time. Not in a sense that is so optimistic that I am unaware of the way that this has played out before. But you watched George Floyd die, and you saw the same thing that I did. And that's why the world is in an uproar, and why this conversation that we are having today is more real than it ever been, because it has allowed us to flatten out the perception of what is actually going on. And no one can lie and say, we don't know the whole situation. We don't know the whole circumstance. Something else must have been afoot in order for us to get to this place. No, we watched him die. And that's the truth. And that part right there is where the hope is that inside of the truth, we have an opportunity to be able to make things better. So with that, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you both. And I think we're going back to Steve.
Thank you, Reverend James and Kevin. Very, very powerful words. And it's really up to all of us to not let the page be turned and no progress. It's up to us to keep this conversation going and keep the discussion going. And so we appreciate what you've shared with us today. And I think we all have to hold each other accountable, that we don't allow this opportunity, what we've been presented with, to make some real changes and to move forward. So we are committed to that at Community Giving. On our website, we have resources, some of which you named. We have white fragility and some of those already listed. The Willie Lynch letter, we will definitely add that to it. And we encourage everybody to check out those resources and do your own exploration in your own time. And but there's a number of resources right now listed at that webpage. So once again, I really want to thank the speakers and for being so public and sharing from their heart. And it's up to us to, again, continue to move this conversation forward. And towards that end, next week, we're very pleased that we're going to feature 4 individuals, one from Brainerd, Wilmer, St. Cloud, and Alexandria, talking about how to engage in community conversations. And so now it's to take it beyond just listening, but to actually get into community conversations throughout the various communities that we're engaged in. And so we hope that you will tune in and learn from some of these individuals about how to have those conversations in your own local communities. We want to see these conversations continue. And as I mentioned, there's resources on the web. At Community Giving, we continue to reflect internally as we go into strategic planning with all of our boards and our various communities. One of the things they're doing is the IDI, which is the Intercultural Developmental Inventory. There's a survey basically for boards to look internally at themselves to see what they're doing. And there's many other things that we know we can do and will be doing. If you have any thoughts or ideas about these webinars, please email us at info@communitygiving.org. We're open to hearing your thoughts and comments and feedback. And we really appreciate you taking time. Nobody had to be here, and so we appreciate you being here to be a part of carrying this conversation forward, the important work that needs to be done. And Kevin and James, again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing. And we look forward to not dropping this opportunity and moving some things forward. So thank you again, and everybody have a great day.